Shortly after Ludmilla completed the official procedures for handing off the least undead forces, their carriages arrived and they left the company captain to collect his men. The man's relief was evident when he realized that he wouldn't have to do so under the curious gazes of 4 young noble women. They found their breakfast waiting for them in the cabin and settled down for the day-long journey to Ingelford. Ludmilla occasionally glanced across at Leanne. Eventually, she couldn't keep silent. "You don't have to look so smug," Ludmilla told her. "I'm feeling pretty smug right now," Leanne said smugly, "so why not?" "It isn't fair to the men in that company," Ludmilla replied. "You've made them out to be elite bodyguards, but they're just regular soldiers tasked with policing duties." Unlike other nations, the Baharuth Empire had a standing army that not only served in the role of national defense against foreign threats, but also functioned in the role of a gendarmerie. Each legion of the Imperial Army had its respective territorial jurisdiction, and every division within each legion had its domestic policing forces. As the army couldn't simply abandon its policing duties in times of war, the forces deployed for wars and other major operations were superior to those left behind to perform customs duties and serve in urban watches. In times of peace, assignments were rotated between all soldiers in the Imperial legions. There was a certain pecking order to the Imperial legions, as well. With talent and ability came prestige and choice assignments, and the 1st Legion was the target for every ambitious legionnaire. Conversely, the 8th Legion was the point of entry for those who had not distinguished themselves in any way, and the Katza marches were the former jurisdiction of the 8th Legion. The positioning of the 8th Legion was ideal for mustering out those unsuited for the army by testing new recruits against the seemingly limitless undead along the southern border. It also served as an insult towards the Kingdom of Riestais, which once occupied the Duchy of Erantle to the west. Our worst is good enough for the likes of you, or something like that. The 7th and 8th Legions were dissolved on paper, but that did not mean its personnel simply vanished. The forces stationed in the Katza marches and along the Azalizia frontier were still transitioning to new chains of command, and many of the garrisons and units responsible for maintaining public order remained as they were. Those with experience and talent who had not taken the Empire's broad offer of careers in civilian vocations were the first to be reassigned to parts of the Empire where they could be put to better use. As such, the company that had arrived to receive them was composed of men who were well equipped and had received basic training, but relegated to dead-end duties in a bottom-rung legion that had already been stripped of its best soldiers. This was probably not within the realm of consideration for a distant bureaucratic functionary putting their seal on the paperwork, or perhaps they were using expendables just in case something happened, so one could say that the result was to be expected. "Don't you think it's an insult?" Leanne said, "sending people like that to pick up a force that can stomp the entire Empire a dozen times over." "Not everyone is obsessed over appearances," Ludmilla picked at her meal. "It's the Imperial Army. They dispatched the people they thought appropriate to carry out the task, which consisted of local forces who could convey them to the next jurisdiction. With the way our administration is," Clara added, "anything that smacked of excess might have drawn the wrong sort of attention from Lady Albedo." Leanne's gaze slowly went from Clara to Ludmilla. "What?" Ludmilla said. "I think we're gonna have to work on you two before we interact with anyone important in the Empire," Leanne told them. "I don't think it's that bad," Florine said. "Maybe," Leanne replied, "but it's better safe than sorry. We're here on personal business, but it's still the Empire." Ludmilla furrowed her brow at the statement. "I have no idea what that's supposed to mean." The Countess of Wagner forked a slice of sausage into her mouth before leaning back in her seat. She remained silent for several moments as she watched the landscape speed by. The other side of the border was not much different than what could be seen in the Sorceress Kingdom, a pastoral vista of agricultural lands and the copses that provided firewood and timber to the surrounding villages. Leanne washed down her food with a sip of squeezed rain fruit before looking back across at them again. "The Imperial nobility is every bit the nobility that you might have seen in Riestais." Leanne's icy eyes glistened in the morning light. "Except the Emperor made sure that only the monsters survived. Those attempting to maneuver with us on the field lived through the bloody Emperor's rise to power and have managed to keep their positions to this day." "I don't think all Imperial nobles will be like that," Clara said. "You have the nobles who survived because they are genuinely capable and have stayed out of unnecessary politics. There are also the new nobles who obtained their positions through distinguished service under the current Emperor's rule." "Sure," Leanne admitted, But as long as you hold any value in the arena, you're still considered either a player or a piece. Also, power shows people for what they truly are. These newly promoted bureaucrats aren't like us. We've been raised with expectations of wielding some sort of power, either personally or through the houses we might have joined. We've had a long time to address any glaring problems that our families or households have noticed. The Empire's new nobles are the most volatile part of the imperial establishment's equation. They've gone from nobody to somebody, and their behavior can go in any which way. Ludmilla replaced the cover on her mostly eaten breakfast, cradling her drink. As far as I understand it, she said, the Emperor has no tolerance for threats against imperial power. This, politicking sounds like precisely that. The Emperor's control over the imperial army ensures that any overt threats can be dealt with, Lian said. In a place where the nails that stick out get hammered, however, people just learn how to not stick out. The problematic great houses and members of the imperial dynasty were taken care of during Jerkniv's coup, while everyone else was already on his side in the first place or pressured into compliance. The power of the imperial throne is secure, but that doesn't stop houses and factions from pursuing their interests and rivalries. In fact, making sure that they're expending their resources and influence against one another is just a way for the Emperor to keep everyone under him in check. I don't think we're going to involve ourselves in any of the local politics, Ludmilla said. As you say, we're here for personal reasons. I'll be here for longer, but that time will be with the Imperial legions. Like I said, if you hold any value in the arena, you're considered either a player or a piece. Declining to participate doesn't mean you can't be used. The Imperial army isn't any better. As a whole they may be loyal to the Emperor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're loyal to each other. Would she have to deal with this sort of thing from now on? Even the slightest whiff of politics or intrigue made her want to turn around and run the other way. Ludmilla frowned out of the carriage window, looking up at the overcast skies. After some thought, she sighed. If it was as inevitable as Lian made it seem, she would be better off knowing how to deal with it. Then what do you think we should do? Ludmilla asked. First, Lian said, you have to drop that theocracy accent. I do not see anything wrong with the way that we speak, Clara frowned. You might not, but people in the Empire will look down on you as, Lian's voice trailed off, and she looked down at her leftovers. As what? She was probably going to say crazy zealots from the theocracy, Florine filled in. Hey. I wasn't, okay, maybe I was, but I was trying to figure out a better way to put it. But we're not crazy zealots from the theocracy, Ludmilla said. We're crazy zealots from the Sorceress Kingdom, Clara nodded. The two city nobles across from them blinked in unison. It's not funny when you two say that, Lian muttered. That is how people see us, yes? Clara said, we don't ever intend on straying from our faith and we aren't ashamed of it, so others can think what they will. Lian sighed. She drained her glass before speaking again. My original notion has more to do with how imperial citizens see others. They're very proud of their empire, they're the most progressive and magically integrated state with all sorts of great institutions and a promising future. The faith of the Four is the main religion there, too, so you two will be seen as unfortunate, backwards foreigners who follow an equally backwards religion. If you're perceived as stupid and unsophisticated, that might encourage people to try something. And people give us a hard time for supposedly being discriminatory, Ludmilla groused. Can't we just pretend to be stupid and ignore everything? Like Riestais, the Empire is mostly run by men, so they'll be more than happy to admire some empty-headed ornaments. I don't want to look stupid. Lian fumed. That might work for when we don't want to deal with annoying people that come our way, but Florine and I are here to find consorts. If I miss out on a good candidate because they decide I'm empty-headed, anyway, I don't have weapons of mass destruction like Florine, so I need every advantage I can get. Florine reached out for the knife beside her plate. Lian grabbed her wrist. They struggled for a moment before Lian ended up with the blade stuck in her palm. Our accents aside, Clara said, don't you think that being nobles of the Sorceress Kingdom will supersede everything else? Looking for a consort in the Empire is bound to expose you to imperial politics, as well. I'm sure it will. Lian wiggled the knife around experimentally. But the point is to not let people think there are any openings for them to exploit. Gaining the ear or any sort of influence with a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom is something that a lot of them would risk themselves for. As for our consorts, once we drag them back over the border, it won't matter. You might be worrying too much about this, Clara said. By all reports, the Empire is still scared to death of us. We can leverage this if we want to discourage unwelcome activities. Ludmilla tactics, huh? Leanne rubbed her jaw thoughtfully. Ludmilla frowned at what sounded like an unpleasant new attribution. Does anything good ever get named after me? Don't think so, Leanne said. If we're going to do it that way, we gotta be careful. I'm no good at that kinda stuff, Florine. What? Florine started at the nomination. Why me? Because you're good at it. If you can tame all those demi-humans, Imperial nobles should only be slightly harder. Clara would be the better choice, Florine said. Besides, she's the ranking member between us. I suppose I can come up with something, Clara said. By the way, are there any places we should visit in our winter? With that, their conversation took on a more casual tone. The hours passed and the ubiquitous agrarian scenery rolled by as their conversation lazily drifted from topic to topic. Clara predictably focused on the archives, libraries and historical galleries in her pursuit of the diary's translation and links to Katz's past. Leanne wanted to visit the Imperial Ministry of Magic, but Ludmilla was fairly certain that one couldn't simply visit a place like that. Florine wanted a taste of the fine arts, listing several theaters and other supposedly famous venues in the capital. All three of the merchant nobles agreed that they should spend what Ludmilla thought was an unhealthy amount of time in the city markets. As Ludmilla voiced her destinations of choice, Leanne raised an eyebrow. I figured you'd want to go to the arena or some of the places in the military quarter. I'll have to drop by the military quarter once I start my duties here anyway. Why the arena? Because it's the arena. You're a martial noble, right? Heck, you don't even have to be one. Everyone loves the arena in our winter. Just because I happen to fight a lot doesn't mean that I enjoy blood sports. Ludmilla thought it might be educational, at best. That being said, it seemed that many members of the Adventurer Guild who acted as proctors seemed to develop a taste for watching training runs. Some even went so far as to say that it should be turned into a form of entertainment for the masses. The Guild's proposed entry for the now-delayed Harvest Festival was a test to see how well it would be received by the citizens. You're one of the last people I expected to want to go to the slave market, Florine said. What possessed you to think of that place? Because slavery is illegal in the Sorceress Kingdom, Ludmilla replied. Yet the Empire hasn't been discouraged from it. That's because we usually don't screw around with the Empire's business, yeah? Leanne said. Plus it's not as if the royal court went out of its way to abolish slavery, they just decided to work with the laws already in place. Still, I'd like to see what's going on. As you've said in the past, the Empire is a nation that has made vast improvements for its subjects. Why slavery would still exist in a supposedly progressive state is beyond me. I can't say I'm not a bit curious as to the reason, as well, Clara said. Also, you're wanting to take a look at the Imperial Magic Academy is a good idea. As far as their visit to our winter went, the Imperial Magic Academy was Ludmilla's main point of interest. The Baharuth Empire saw great success in raising generation after generation of talented individuals through the venerable institution. It was not just something that was needed in Warden's Vale, she felt that it would be necessary for the entire Sorcerer's Kingdom. I'm surprised that it wasn't the first thing you mentioned, Ludmilla replied. The Imperial Magic Academy is something I'm keenly interested in, Clara said, but at the same time it should be the subject of a much longer study. That place is the Empire's greatest weapon, Leanne agreed. You're not gonna unravel its mysteries just by walking around a bit, but I guess it wouldn't hurt to take a peek. They arrived at Angelfort as twilight fell over the city, passing through its southwest gate with little more than a nod and a wave. The ease of their entry annoyed Ludmilla to no end, and she used her skill to gauge the officers at the gate. This further annoyed her since they were not too different from the average customs officer in New Rantel. A small part of Ludmilla reminded her that it was probably an exercise in futility to even try to judge those outside of her jurisdiction, but the result was still irritating. After they disembarked from their carriage in the yard of a merchant inn called Angel's Rest, Leanne sent a look in her direction. What's with the big mood? Big mood? Yeah, you look like you're about to glare a hole into my carriage. I'm just annoyed over how easily those officials at the gate let us in, Ludmilla said. I thought that maybe it was the look of the carriage that encouraged them to carelessly wave us through. Leanne walked over, followed by Florine. The former pointed to the side of the cabin. Ludmilla followed her gesture, gaze coming to rest upon the two sigils on that side of the vehicle, the rolling hills of Gagné and the eight-spoked wheel of Wagner. Should be those, right? Leanne said, even if we're not from the Empire, those guys'll have memorized the sigils of their suzerain's nobility. We're way too big for 'em and they know it. Their superiors'll probably give 'em 3 kinds of hell if they give us any trouble. They should be performing their duties regardless of who appears at the gate. Ludmilla frowned. Why would their superiors get mad at them? Why would we, for that matter? We wouldn't, Leanne shrugged, but they don't know that. We're from the evil nation of monsters or something. Plus, little folk know that they're likely to get squished if they get underfoot around the powerful. That's just the way it is. It's not as if they have 2 Death Knights and an Elder Lich backing them up like our guys do. They didn't, but the rationale did not mollify Ludmilla's feelings on the matter. There was such a thing as being flexible and having the talent to interpret and process things so that interactions went smoothly within the bounds of what was proper. The behavior of the officials at the gate, however, was just criminally negligent. To Ludmilla, they were 2 people entrusted with the city's security letting someone through the gate because they saw something that wasn't worth the personal risk to confront. The Empire was lauded for its supposedly superior administration, professional armies and levels of magical integration unmatched in the region. This image was something Ludmilla looked forward to witnessing in action more than anything else on their journey. Even being aware of Angelfort's circumstances, however, her first impression ended up riddled with disappointment. Still, Leanne tilted her head as she continued looking at the sigils. No matter how I look at 'em, they're tits. They're hills. Okay, now you're just bragging. Florine reached out for Leanne, who deftly evaded her. For a while, at least. Eventually, retribution was visited upon the Countess of Wagner. Nearer to the inn's entrance, Clara turned away from speaking to one of the footmen. The staff wants to know whether, what are you 2 doing? Being attacked by a boo demon? Florine released Leanne, but not before whacking her friend once more. The 2 city nobles straightened their dresses. The staff wants to know where we'll be dining, Clara said. They're already moving our things up to our suite, but... The tavern, obviously, Leanne said. We're here to have fun. Was there some issue with dining in public? Florine asked. According to the footman, Clara answered, it appears to be free of any glaring issues. The answer was more to let the inn staff know what preparations to make. A sudden downpour chased them indoors, where they went upstairs to take a look at their suite. Ludmilla grew confused as it went from an inspection to her 3 friends changing out of their dresses. Amelia looked at her with a question on her face, but Ludmilla shook her head. Why is everyone changing? Ludmilla asked. Because it's the tavern of a merchant inn, Clara said. Come to think of it, Leanne's head popped out of a fresh chemise. Have you ever been to an inn before, Ludmilla? I have, Ludmilla said carefully. Once. And what did you do there? I was there for an investigation, so I worked in my room. Her friends stopped to exchange glances. She won't change out of that, Clara said. It's fine, maybe? This isn't really her thing. What thing? Ludmilla asked. We're going down to have dinner, yes? That's partially right, Leanne said, but mostly wrong. What she means, Florine told her, is that we're mostly here for the entertainment. This is a merchant inn, an arena of commerce. Leanne was right, it wasn't really her thing. Her friends, now garbed as well-to-do merchants, were here to mingle with the tavern's patrons and conduct trade. After we're finished with dinner, Ludmilla said, I can head out and take a look around. I don't want to get in anyone's way. What? No. Leanne walked up and grabbed her wrist. We're here to do stuff together, so let's do stuff together. It's not like we're trying to chase you out or anything. Leanne's hand phased through Ludmilla's wrist. She tried several more times. Why don't we have one of these, whatever's doing that? If you had one, Ludmilla said, your shadow demons wouldn't be able to grab you and fly to safety if it was needed. That effect can be quite annoying, Clara said. She left it on one time and I kept phasing through her while we were sleeping. Note to self, Leanne said, Clara is a clingy sleeper. Anyway, dealing with merchants might not be for you, but there's plenty of other stuff that'll keep things interesting. Upon returning to the tavern, they found their table already prepared. A portly man with a graying beard and receding hairline awaited them. He seemed to sweat at their appearance. Welcome, my ladies." For some reason, he saw fit to bow 3 times. "The name's Otis, proprietor of Angel's Rest. It is my greatest pleasure to—" His voice trailed off as Florine stepped forward and smiled up at him. "Thank you for your welcome, Otis," she said. "It would please us if you simply treat us as you would your other guests. Might I ask what is being served for dinner?" "Of course, my love, of course." The proprietor straightened and cleared his throat. "The night's meal is the seasonal fare, breaded cutlets with cheese, ham and spiced potatoes with onion gravy and a creamy vegetable stew. I also recommend the sissa that we just imported from the north." After ensuring that they all found the meal agreeable, Otis hurried off into the kitchen. Their booth was nestled in a corner overlooking the tavern. Nearby, a well-stocked hearth sent waves of warmth into the air. Leanne ran her fingers over the worn surface of the table with a satisfied expression before producing a file folder. "What's that?" Ludmilla asked. "Reports left by my caravans that have come through here in the past few weeks," Leanne answered. "Things have been turning out quite nicely." "It didn't feel nice coming in," Clara noted. "Well, yeah," Leanne replied, "but it's a good opportunity for us." Leafing through the contents of the folder, Leanne split them into 4 sets. "What do you mean by didn't feel nice?" Ludmilla took her papers in hand. "Something like Facet County?" "It isn't the same as Facet County," Clara told her. "It's a different sort of feeling, like this city is sick. I suppose it's more a sense for merchants, or maybe merchant nobles. We can see signs of it everywhere." On the sheets of paper were reports which were haphazardly scrawled with handwriting from multiple individuals. The contents were spare in detail, listing what appeared to be inventories or at least estimates and various notes attached to them. As she flipped through, Ludmilla thought she recognized a common theme. "This is mostly surplus, the aftermath of the 8th Legion's dissolution?" "Yup," Leanne grinned. "Told you you'd find something interesting." Their meals arrived, and they put their reports away. Unlike dinners hosted at their respective homes, her 3 friends seemed to be in a rush to finish their meals. Ludmilla smirked at their focused expressions as she slowly took her time with her own. "The type of food they serve here looks similar to what we often have at your place," Ludmilla said. "What part of the empire was your family from again?" "The eastern part," Leanne said. "One of the towns north of the Wyvernmark. I'm not sure if I have any relations left there. Well, if there are, I guess they'll pop up once they realize how well we're doing in the Sorceress Kingdom." "My second assignment is in the Wyvernmark. Have you ever been there?" "Nope. I've been all the way to the Great Steppe and back, but we never cared to take a detour to our ancestral lands. Not that it's a particularly bad place, just quiet and out of the way of anywhere worth visiting." Her briefing with the Grand Marshal's General Staff mentioned as much. The southeastern frontier was the least developed part of the Baharuth Empire. It did not have the convenient waterways of the north, and it was out of the way of the great trade route that included Irantal, Arwinter, Carnassus, and the cities in the lands beyond human influence. Before Ludmilla was a quarter of the way done with her meal, Leanne had already finished hers. Clara and Florine were not far behind. They pushed their plates out of the way and pulled out Leanne's reports again. Ludmilla could only shake her head. Did she look like that when reviewing military matters? She finished her meal a few minutes later, joining the others in their reading. The inventories weren't so much supplies for an army as they were the supplies for those who were supposed to support that army. Raw materials, textiles, tools, everything for the industries of Ingelfort that had built themselves up around the forces once stationed in the Katsa marches. "If you knew this was happening," Ludmilla asked, "why weren't you already taking advantage of it?" "Because it was something we could sit on for a bit," Leanne answered. "Things don't become ideal the moment something changes. It takes time for markets to shift around. You should already know that from watching the grain and timber prices back at home." "So you were waiting for prices to drop?" "Yep. The Empire is the Empire's biggest customer, especially when it comes to stuff that's meant for humans. The presence of the Sorceress Kingdom is still hurting trade from the Theocracy and Reistize. Humans are a minority in Carnassus. There aren't enough ways to get this stuff out of here, so, eventually, the merchants here will liquidate to put their money back to work again or prevent their inventories from becoming a liability." Ludmilla drained what remained of her sissa. The tart liquor was far better than she expected it to be. Leanne's reasoning seemed sound, even with Ludmilla's limited knowledge of commercial operations. The merchants of the city were stuck with goods that barely had any demand and proper storage incurred costs. Breaking even was probably an acceptable outcome, and cutting losses was better than paying to hold onto their inventories through an uncertain market. "This seems a bit exploitative," Ludmilla said. "What stops you from eventually having them give you everything for free?" "Other merchants," Leanne shrugged. "Eventually, people on both ends of the trade will think that things are good enough and they shouldn't get too greedy. It's like a merchant's test of mettle. Also, it's not exploitative, it's a risk that was taken and didn't pan out. We're simply making trades at a mutually agreed upon price." She looked to Clara and Florine, who nodded in agreement. If they thought so. With that said, Leanne leaned forward. "Split? You mean we're ganging up on them?" Florine asked. "Why not?" Leanne answered. "It works great and there's something in it for all of us." "I suppose we always do this." Florine started marking out things with her pen. "I should be able to make quite a lot of this work." Leanne looked over to Clara. "I don't mind," Clara said. "We have the room and raw materials at these prices. What about the tools? Your workshops put out far superior ones and we're trying to establish equipment standards in our territories." "It's scrap at worst," Leanne replied, "and we'll probably be able to sell most of this stuff back to the Empire in a few months." "The Empire can't get rid of these goods," Ludmilla frowned, "yet you think you can sell them back to the Empire?" "It's a trade just like any other," Leanne shrugged. I guess most people think that trading is about buying something cheap in one place and selling it for a higher price elsewhere. It's actually just making a profit on goods however you can. You don't even need to go anywhere. That's what those warehouses and storage lots in Iranthal do, yeah? They buy in bulk from the merchants coming in and wait to sell to the city when the price is right. We're doing the reverse of what the people liquidating here are doing. We have a lot of unused warehouse space and we're storing goods until the prices go back to normal again. Anything we haven't used by then, we just sell back across the border for a profit. Costs for shipping and tolls won't hurt your margins?" "A bit, but not enough at these prices. Oftentimes, all you need are the right resources on hand to take advantage of an opportunity." Now well into the evening, the rest of the tavern had mostly filled with occasional additions coming in soaked from the rain. After a fresh round of drinks was delivered to their table, Leanne peered at her. "Switch spots with Clara, Lady Zaradnik." "Why am I Lady Zaradnik, all of the sudden?" "Since you're in that get-up, we may as well use it. You're Baroness Zaradnik. We're the mysterious, talented, and beautiful merchants working for you." "And then what?" "And then we bring the local merchants gathered in the inn to our table." Ludmilla scanned the tavern floor. People occasionally moved about, going from table to table as they dealt with one another. "You weren't going out there like those other merchants?" "That'd be fun, too," Leanne replied, "but we're employing some different tactics. This is the best spot in the tavern too. Everyone would rather get cozy at this table than anywhere else. Anyway, let's get this started. We'll perform the negotiations. All you have to do is sit there looking like you're dissatisfied with something as usual." Shifting out of her seat, Ludmilla moved to trade places with Clara, wondering how often she would be playing a similar role. "Lady Frianne, we've already done everything we can." "Are you sure, Lord Anok? We barely have any information. How is that possible? And how do people just pop up like this? When the Sorcerer King himself can pop up for a match in the arena without any forewarning whatsoever, what do you expect?" Frianne Wylie van Gushman bit her lip as she rubbed what she thought was a spot on her counterpart's armor. It wasn't a very productive exercise, but she felt that she had to do something in the absence of anything to do. "Lady Frianne, any more and you're going to wear a hole in my breastplate." After she fussed with his adamantite cuirass for several more moments, Lord Anok, that was, Count Palatine Nimble Arkdale Anok, the fierce scale of the great Imperial Knights of the Baharuth Empire, finally raised a gauntleted hand to still hers. Frianne furrowed her brow before releasing a resigned sigh. "Where's Lord Vermilion? Isn't he the one that's best equipped to receive dignitaries from the Sorceress Kingdom?" "Lord Vermilion is in the Wyvern Mark observing the delivery of forces from the Sorceress Kingdom," Lord Anok told her. "Which was scheduled months in advance, might I add. Maybe this was taking advantage of that. It would be foolish for me to tell you to relax when dealing with anyone from the Sorceress Kingdom, but, at the same time, you're one of the most talented members of the palace staff. And so the fate of the Empire rests on the shoulders of someone who graduated from the academy this summer, Freyan muttered. We're doomed. This is not what I joined the Imperial administration for. I think every member of the court council eventually says that. Lord Anok offered her an apologetic look. So I guess that means you're fitting right in. At least things aren't as bad as before. Every new set of graduates from the academy fill some of the holes left behind. Freyan decided to leave Lord Anok's deflection as it was. They both knew the reason behind her selection to receive these particular visitors. Generally speaking, no one volunteered to deal with anyone from the Sorceress Kingdom. In fact, they avoided it when they could. Otherwise reliable members of the court council became mysteriously ill or found themselves busy seeing to some pressing matter of state far away enough to not be called upon. Be they a prideful member of the old nobility, an ambitious member of the new nobility, or even a general of the imperial army, they all shriveled up like torn wineskins at the mere mention of meeting one of the monsters next door. As a junior member of the imperial administration's palace staff, an aide to the court council, Freyan's life was already hectic enough as it was. A not insignificant number of the nobles who once served as members of the council had been implicated for various offenses or dishonorably discharged after being found inadequate for their positions. As such, the heart of the imperial administration was woefully short-staffed, much to her esteemed cousin's belated regret. Her first day on the job 2 months ago was akin to being faced by a pack of ravenous saber wolves, desperate for talent and manpower. You should know from your father just how crazy things were before, Lord Anok said. Duke Gushmund is a true pillar of the Empire. Maybe we should find that pillar and stand him up in front of these dignitaries instead. Let's not. He's not a pillar that His Imperial Majesty can afford to see collapse. That old firebrand can handle any human opponents, but not a cadre of monsters. And just who is, exactly? Maybe we should have hired adventurers, instead. No one in the Imperial Palace knew what to expect. Though various members of the palace staff had interacted with agents from the Sorceress Kingdom before, they traveled to attend an official audience somewhere in the neighboring nation. Even the Emperor was no exception. As a client state, they went to them and not the other way around. Curious members of the court council who wanted to know what the audiences were like were answered with "It's a nice place" or "The drinks are great" or some other suspiciously generic positive comment. Those who went tried to avoid it whenever possible, making the Sorceress Kingdom seem all the more unfathomably terrifying. Now, for some reason, the Sorceress Kingdom was coming to them. Even worse was the fact that it was an unofficial visit and the appointment at the palace was merely some sort of courtesy call. There was nothing that hinted at what they should prepare for, the notice so abrupt that any fresh information that they tried to collect would come in too late. Yet, for all of their short notice, their visitors decided to come by coach, which gave the palace staff just enough time to impotently stew in their worries without being able to do much else. Whoever was coming knew exactly what they were doing. The Empire had been caught off guard and unprepared. So many cracks had appeared that Freyan could only wonder how they would slip through to do whatever they had come to do. As the designated time drew close, Freyan and Lord Anok left the administrative wing of the Imperial Palace, making their way through its marble corridors towards the main atrium. She flipped through the few bits of information that they actually had. "Were you able to find out anything new about today's arrivals?" Lord Anok asked. "Nothing beyond what we already knew," Freyan replied. 3 of these nobles have a merchant presence in the Empire. The names are not new, either. They're all some form of the titles that existed in the Duchy of Erantal before its annexation by the Sorceress Kingdom. This was another reason why she had been chosen, not due to her ability or education, but for her lineage. The nobles of Reistais, if these people were still the same nobles, could be just as pretentious as members of the imperial aristocracy. Though this visit was an unofficial one, the proper forms needed to be observed just in case. The visiting party was listed as 2 countesses and 2 baronesses. Lord Anok was a Count Palatine, a great imperial knight, and a member of the Empire's old blood. Freyan was a duke's daughter and thus a member of the imperial dynasty. This combination provided a rough balance that would be acceptable should their visitors have an inclination for such observances. The question remains as to who these titles now belong to. Lord Anok seemed to shudder. If a dragon walks through the entrance, the Royal Earth Guard is going to have a relapse. That was indeed the question. To the befuddlement of everyone, the Sorcerer King had decided to adopt the laws of Reastais, meaning that the systems of their former neighbor, including those of the nobility and the judiciary, supposedly still existed. This didn't mean that the titles within the duchy remained in human hands, however. Given the apparent excellence of the Sorceress Kingdom's administration and the reported ineptitude of Reastais' nobility, one could only assume that the human nobles in the territory had been replaced. Since elder liches were known to work in the administration of their suzerain, Frianne could only imagine 4 elder liches walking into the imperial palace. Her imagination was not fertile enough to come up with what a cabal of elder liches might want to make a personal visit to the empire for, or maybe it shut down entirely out of a desire for self-preservation. Frianne and Lord Anok came out into the brightly lit main atrium of the imperial palace, where many bureaucratic functionaries were either on their way out for the evening or gathered in small groups discussing one thing or the other. At the appearance of Lord Anok, however, the groups rapidly broke up and everyone hastened to make their way out. So this is what it must feel like to have your allies abandon you on the eve of battle. At least the guards didn't run, Lord Anok said. A member of the Royal Earth Guard, each an elite of the 1st Legion as strong as a gold-ranked adventurer, stood at each column lining the walls of the atrium, resplendent in their enchanted arms and armor. Given that they were supposedly receiving dignitaries and not expecting to fight a battle, the benefit that they provided was dubious compared to the experienced palace staff that had just fled. Visitors from other nations may have been impressed by the ranks of the Royal Earth Guard, but they were probably no more significant than common laborers in the eyes of these dignitaries from the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Despite receiving their visitors in the heart of imperial power, it felt like there was nothing they could do to gain the Empire an advantage for this meeting. Frianne idly wondered if this was how her cousin felt for the past 6 months. Hopefully, she wouldn't start losing hair like he was. "Do you think they will expect to see His Imperial Majesty?" she asked. "I know what it says on the notice, but all we can do is pray that they don't," Lord Anok answered. "He's already receiving an important guest." Frianne suppressed a shudder at the thought of the important guest. She had seen him once before, while he was being taken on a tour of the palace. Though she constantly reminded herself that he was the sovereign of another nation, she could not help but see him as a giant rodent. Today marked his 3rd visit in as many months, and she could not fathom why he kept coming. There was certainly no paperwork of diplomatic or economic significance related to the visits. A shadow in the door caught her attention. Every eye in the atrium followed the 1st Legion knight as he made his way in on hurried steps. The man offered a salute as he approached. "Report," Lord Anok said as the man approached. "They've entered the district," the knight said. "If they don't stop anywhere, they'll be here in a few minutes." "Do they have a knight escort?" "Yes, Lord Anok. We met them with a dozen men. Also, the idiots are gathering." "Great. Just what we need." "Is causing problems the only thing they're good at?" Lord Anok gripped the hilt of his sword. "How much money did they spend to get their information?" "Is this going to be a problem?" Frianne asked. "I think so," the knight answered. "The curtains of the carriage weren't drawn. We saw 4 young women inside." Lord Anok's gauntleted hand came up to rest on his forehead. A finger tapped rhythmically as he sighed. "So you've gone from an honor guard to an actual escort," he said. "Such as it is," the knight replied. "At least the men have a familiar task to focus on." "Right. Was there anything else of note?" "Nothing that stood out to us, my lord," the knight said. "Well, it was a nice carriage, I guess." Lowering his hand, Lord Anok dismissed the knight. To Frianne's surprise, the news only seemed to trouble him further. "At least they weren't undead," she said lightly. You don't get it yet, Lady Frianne. Does this have something to do with all of the niece and good that people who have dealt with the Sorceress Kingdom always reply with when you ask about it?" "Maybe that's a part of it," Lord Anok replied. "A nation of monsters, that's how people refer to the Sorceress Kingdom. But it's misleading. When people think of monsters, they think of something strong and savage. Mindless or arrogant beasts that can have their ignorance or hubris turned against them. Something that can be defeated through ingenuity and heroic effort. Only after dealing with the Sorceress Kingdom do you understand what a true monster is." A line of silhouettes appeared in the golden light of the evening outside. As the 4 figures entered the far end of the grand atrium, Lord Anok shook his head slowly. power, wealth, intellect, beauty, or in every sense of the word. That is what the Sorcerer King surrounds himself with. What follows in his wake? The wise will stay out of the way, and the fools who think to gain some advantage over them will be consumed like insects in a blaze. Frianne folded her hands in front of her lap, gathering all of the poise she could muster. As the four women made their way towards them, she examined their features. Maybe I should let your sisters know about them. Let's not. My desk drawer is already about to rupture. For the Empire? Spare me, please, my lady. She managed to smile after hearing the discomfort in Lord Anok's usually unshakable voice. The smile slipped away, however, when the sound of rapid steps echoed from one of the columns near their guests. Frianne cast a spell on Lord Anok. See invisibility. That idiot. Lord Anok dashed forward. Frianne cast the spell again on herself, and a translucent man appeared in her augmented vision. Though the nearest knights were also aware of the intruder, they misjudged where the man was and failed to intercept him. They gave chase after the sound of his footsteps, but the distance to the invisible man's targets was mere meters away. The man was too close. The guards were out of position. Lord Anok was only halfway across the atrium. Frianne was out of spell range. Their guests had only just arrived and the world was already set to shatter. As the man closed within 3 meters of the four women, the tallest of them stepped out and placed a silk-clad hand on his shoulder. He abruptly stopped and reversed direction as he was pushed back towards the pursuing knights. The action seemed so effortless that one might have thought that, rather than a fully grown man, the tall woman had caught and returned a doll filled with straw. The man stumbled backwards and the knights found his arms. They started to drag him back towards the entrance. Wait, he cried as his magic was dispelled. I'm here. A gauntleted hand clamped over his mouth. Petals scattered over the floor as the man dropped his bouquet and attempted to wrench his makeshift muzzle loose. He struggled the entire way back out, eventually disappearing into the sunset. Frianne caught up to Lord Anok, wrinkling her nose at the pungent odor of too much cologne. Lord Anok flicked the flowers away with the toe of his boot. Never mind gaining any advantages on their own territory, they hadn't even managed to maintain the Empire's dignity.